we need all of those different opinions. We need all of those different values. We need all of those different things for the ecosystem of humans to be successful.
Right.
And so oftentimes when we talk about the workplace culture and the different types of cultures that exist, it's really important. It really is, because we need those white collar people to be successful. We need the politicians to be successful.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sam, and this is the Illegitimate Scholar Podcast. I got undergrad degrees in history, anthropology, and education because I love all things human and learning. But then I quit my master's degree and teaching program because traditional education didn't allow me to discuss the topics I wanted to and limited how I talked about others. I started this podcast to discuss culture and history without the limitations of authoritarian public schools and woke universities. If you also feel ostracized by the mainstream but love social studies, please join me here. The following is a conversation with my brother. He quit his state job to pursue real estate and has been successful in doing that for the last few years. Our discussion today centers on workplace culture and how they differ from job to job. We discuss selection of jobs by people with certain traits and how elitism plays a role in the culture of high-status jobs. The audio is a little lacking as I'm traveling in Washington, but the conversation was fun to have, and I hope it's fun to listen to.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Matt, and let's see. I was excited to join you on this podcast. I listened to the ones you've done before this, and I find it super fascinating and fun to talk about, and there's a lot of thought-provoking stuff, so thanks for having me.
You might be a little bit biased, but okay, yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, so what's your background? We're gonna be talking about workplace culture today and a few things related to it, but what's your background, Matt?
Yeah, so I guess my background as it pertains to the workplace culture is
and everything, like whatever you feel like
sure.
sharing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I guess it's all kind of the same, but so I was born and raised here in Seattle, and my dad was a construction worker, and my mom was a waitress. So both very much blue collar, hardworking, always working type deal. And so then, once I got out of high school, I spent some time doing a couple different things, but ultimately ended up in state government where I spent 15 years. And then after that, I decided to make a switch and I started doing real estate as a real estate broker. And so they're two very vastly different things. And so when I was listening to your podcast about culture and things like that, like one thing that really stuck out to me was how vastly different those two types of things are. And it really made me think about how so many different professions look, and then how they all kind of divide into 4 or 5 very distinct categories. Like, of course, we hear blue collar and white collar and things like that, but there's more than that. But those are the things that really fascinate me in terms of like how different they are. So so that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, so you worked in state government for 15 years, and now you're a real estate broker or real estate agent? Are those
same
thing?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I learned that today. Okay, yeah. So, and you've been doing that for, what, 2-3 years now?
3 years, yeah.
3 years? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going okay, even in the down economy?
Yeah, no, it's going really good. Obviously, things have changed a little bit. Things are down a little bit right now with rates going up and people are slowing down. But, houses are still selling. People are still buying. And so if you get yourself out there and push hard enough, you're still going to find business. So.
Yeah, and it's actually really funny that you moved from those two things, because I didn't make the connection until right now. But I was in the Marine Corps, which is definitely like a blue collar type thing. It's not exactly blue collar, but it's a blue collar type thing. And then I moved to go to college, and I was in the process of becoming a teacher when I decided that honestly it was the workplace culture that got me to quit. I don't think that was the same for you, maybe, but the culture between the two different places was such a shock to me, and I've been thinking about this same thing a lot. So when you say okay, so like one of the things that I like Marine Corps to going to college, I remember like when there's a problem in the Marine Corps, like it's addressed immediately, sometimes through violence, unfortunately, but at least yelling and things like that. Like problems are addressed immediately, and they're addressed like very straightforward. And when I moved to different, I was a tutor, and I did a few other things in college. I was also a server, but that's its own different thing. When I moved to college, like the people were so different. I don't want to say weaker, but they were weaker. They're like weaker. And that's from my perspective as somebody who was getting out of the Marine Corps. And like what I perceived as weakness, other people wouldn't perceive it as weakness. Like the people in college, they wouldn't perceive that as weakness. They would perceive that as either like a normal baseline or like common courtesy and like not being, not causing issues. But for me, it's like I thought that certain things that people did were extremely disrespectful. And when people weren't being like straightforward with me, like somebody has an issue and then it has to go through like other channels instead of somebody just being like, hey, I have a problem with what you're doing, which is what I would have preferred.
But see, that's kind of why I wanted to discuss this topic today, because like you're saying, a fish out of water. Like you go from the Marine Corps to being a teacher, and it's a culture shock, very much so, right? And then you get in there, and your first thought is, maybe I'm superior to these people because look how tough I am, and they're looking at you like, who's this guy?
Yeah, this guy's an asshole.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating like that because they are such a different type of things.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about culture, it's like really what does define, like what does that look like when you're in the Marine Corps? What does that look like? What does your life look like? Like people have a vision in their head of what that looks like, but what does your work day look like? What does your weekend looks like? Like what do you do with the families? All of that. Like there's so much that goes into being a Marine.
Yeah.
And then you get out of that, you become a civilian, you go become a teacher, and it looks vastly different, So I'm sure there's quite a bit of differences in those two.
Yeah, there's a lot of differences. There's a lot of differences with almost any civilian jobs. There are certain civilian jobs that are definitely more similar to the military. Like off the top of my head, I'm thinking about like, a civilian sailor is pretty similar to the military. And like certain like lineman jobs are kind of similar culturally to the military, to the Marine Corps even. And it's like these jobs, I think they like based on what they have to do and the types of people that are in them, they form their own cultures. And like blue collar as a whole, white collar as a whole, yeah, they form their own cultures. But even in individual industries will form their own cultures. And maybe this happens naturally through like whatever types of people join, and the firm that happens to be most successful at doing it, their culture might spread to other places. It's kind of similar to how a country's culture might expand. And like the Roman Empire had other countries around it, other nations around it that were kind of copying them, doing what they did because the culture was so strong and influenced them to adopt the culture. So I kind of see jobs in the same way. Like Wall Street culture develops, and like Wall Street's a very specific one, and there's lots of very specific things about Wall Street culture. And it evolves out of this really fast-paced environment where these people are trading, and the people who do the best, the people that are most successful, and it's very obvious monetarily that they're successful when, of course, they're dealing with money, whatever they act like, how they act and how that makes them more money, makes more people act that way, and it forms the culture of that place, of that place or of that industry.
Yeah, I definitely think you develop a mentality of those who you surround yourself with, right? So
yeah,
if you spend time on Wall Street and you're around people who are working 20 hours a day and they're highly successful, you're going to see that and you're going to say, well, Sam is very successful.
A little bit closer to the mic, sorry.
I want to be better.
Yeah.
Like if I see you and you're very successful and I see that you're working 20 hours a week, naturally I'm going to say, okay, well, or 20 hours a day. Naturally I'm going to say, well, I should probably be working 20 hours a day.
Go.
Yeah. So if I'm around you and I see that you're working 20 hours a day and you're highly successful, based off what I view success as, then I should probably work 20 hours a day too. So the more I spend around like people like you and other people who are successful, I'm going to adopt their customs. I'm going to adopt the things that they do, the places that they go, the people they communicate with, and try to emulate that success
right
on my end.
Right. Yeah. So are you talking about me specifically right now?
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It stroke my ego a little bit. Yeah. For all 6 of the listeners we have here.
7 now.
7. Great. Okay. So yeah, it's like that. And the one thing often what I think about when I'm thinking about the school environment like that, there's teachers are disproportionately in this country, especially in Connecticut. They come from like, disproportionately the upper middle class white America. Like teachers are disproportionately white. They're disproportionately upper middle class. And because of the types of people that go into any profession, it might not be what the profession needs. It might be like how those people already are. And because of that, they have certain traits that's based on their socioeconomic class, their race, their religion, or whatever. And that makes it very easy for people who are already in that culture. They already have cultural and personal traits that match the culture of that workplace.
They don't like the original influencers are the teachers, right?
Well, it's for more than just teachers, but yeah, I mean when you look at who becomes a teacher and who the standards that teachers have, or the standards that even administrators have, those are formed by their own beliefs. And when those people are disproportionately from a certain sector of society, they're going to have standards that reflect that. And they're going to push out people that don't think the same way as them. And somebody who is outside of that, naturally, then they have to compromise themselves and their other culture even more in order to fit it in those places.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, though. Like, maybe that's how it is in Connecticut. Like, for me, I know going even back to, like, my middle school days, my high school days, the teachers' pool was a bit more diverse. You know, it was very much mixed between men and women, all different races. And it never seemed in school for me like it was just primarily white, if you will. And then what's even more so interesting is, you know, there is a change in society right now. It is becoming more and more accepted to have more and more diversity in many different places. And of course, teaching is one of those where it leads to the front of the line because it's run by government. It's almost like force-fed at first, but then adopted rather quickly. And so, like, I know my kids are in middle school right now, and I see quite a bit of diversity from there. But when I say influencer, I mean, like you had just said, you know, the teachers bring their culture to the schools. They bring their ideals, their thoughts, and stuff like that to their classrooms, and I can see that in my children. And I'm totally okay with that because I can't give them certain things at home outside of my culture, outside of my race, or whatever, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when I look at the I think the problem I have with it, and there's a lot of stuff written about this in literature posted or literature read by like education colleges. Most of it in education colleges concentrates on racial differences. So that's kind of the one that I'm most informed about. But I think even though there hasn't been as much on it, the socioeconomic stuff is there as well. But I think, unfortunately, what it does is it allows people from upper class families, their kids are already better suited for the situation that's being created by the teachers because those teachers are of that culture, right? So if those teachers are of that culture and those are the standards that they have, then they're going to, when they look at another kid who's, you know, poor white kid, lower middle class white kid, middle class black kid even, you know, they're going to look at them and they might perceive them differently than a different person. And on average, like, yeah, there is some diversity in teaching, but when you look at it like as a whole in the country, it still is very disproportionately white and disproportionately rich, although people don't seem to care about that as much, which I think they should.
It's interesting to talk about race and that, but at the same time, that's what's so cool about culture is that it's something that you can choose. You know, race is kind of like your human nature piece of it. You're born into a race. You don't have a choice.
Right.
But, you know, who do you surround yourself with? What customs do you adopt? Things like that. Like, that's what gives you the opportunity to make your own identity in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. But I also think that, like, when I'm thinking individually, you know, individually people have, they can make choices. But when I look at it at like a population level, most people aren't going to do that. Like most people, humans take, most of the time they take the path of least resistance. So like humans are taking the path of least resistance when humans are growing up. Every single little thing, like your grandparents, your parents, like every day, humans take in information, especially babies. They're like a sponge, right? They take in information. They take in, like, there are incentives, like, you know, a parent might give the kid something they like when certain things happen, and the kid learns to promote certain behaviors and learns to negate others. You know, promote and learns to like certain behaviors, not like certain other behaviors. So, like, people's values become very deep rooted, and they're based on, like, where they're from, and certain people will, like, break the mold, and they'll go way out from wherever they were from, and they'll do something totally new. But most people stay kind of stuck in whatever they're in, which could be a good thing, or it could be a bad thing. And I don't.
Well, one thing that really sticks out to me in terms of the difference of the classes in terms of work and stuff is the amount of pride that people put into it. You know, so if you have somebody who's blue collar, they take a lot of pride in that.
Yeah.
They take a lot of pride in how they show up for that community, and then the white collar people too will take a lot of pride in, like, how cutthroat are they, how successful are they, like how many people did they have to squash to get there. And that's the extreme piece of it, of course, because
at the top it's like psychopaths.
At the top, we were talking about this earlier, there's, you know, a vast majority of the white collar class that's not like that they're decent humans that do good work and provide for all of us. And then the blue collar too, there's the extremes. But that's one thing that always stands out for me in terms of, like how did they choose to be blue collar? And oftentimes it's because they feel more comfortable in that culture,
and they likely grew up in it, you know, and whatever it was valued by,
or they grew up in it and decided to get out of it, which is going to be our next topic. The counterculture.
And that's, you know, most people aren't going to. They're not. Most people aren't going to. Like, people talk about the American dream, and I would say that the American dream quantified is rising to a higher socioeconomic status than your parents. And most people don't do that. Especially today, a lot of people are going down because the middle class is sort of dying. But in the past, in like the recent past, even still, most people are not advancing in socioeconomic status. And I think actually the two of us are two people that did advance in socioeconomic status.
Yeah, to an extent, yeah. But I would kind of disagree with that too, because, okay, if you are born and you see that your father is extremely wealthy and your dad quantifies success as dollars, and you say you want to get above that, well, oftentimes a lot of people will try to break free from the mold that their parents set. So you're not going to see success as monetarily, but that's still how you view success. So even though you might not attain the wealth that your dad did, that doesn't mean you're not more successful than he was, or in general, not your specific father, but you see what I'm saying.
Yeah. And, you know, it's a capitalist culture thing to just measure success as a baseline socioeconomic status based on a number. And that, you know, that isn't the only marker of success.
Right. And I think that that's one thing that's vastly different today than when I was a kid. You know, back then it was a lot more dollars and cents, period. Nowadays there's so many different ways that people live, so many different ways that people want to live, how they want to be happy. I know a lot of people who scoff at having that much money.
It feels like money is more important now than it was.
Well, I don't think money's ever going to be more or less important than it is, because it represents survival. You know, it's food, it's shelter, it's comfort, it's all of those things. But I guess
people buy more shit now, you know.
Yeah, true.
Like, the average home is larger. Like, people consume more. Like, it's
Well, but that was the point I was going to make on what I had just said about, maybe it's not as important as it was. Is you see, like, this tiny house revolution that's going on, and especially in real estate, I see it quite a bit, where I get people that call and they say, I want to buy a tiny house, or I want to buy a shipping container and put it on a little tiny piece of land and make it something. There's a lot of people these days.
To this, do not live in a shipping container. That is a bad idea.
I can show you some cool ones though.
I see they look very cool. I don't think it's just build a tiny house with a frame on a foundation. You don't need to buy it. Sorry, keep going.
Exactly. But, in some of your earlier podcasts, you talked a lot about how do cultures shift over time. And that's something that I see going on right now, not just in the housing industry, but in a lot of different things. As we get bigger and as we get more advanced, you start to see a lot of people breaking from that mold. And it's just creating new customs is all.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, but they definitely did. I think that
in the past there were a lot more of those types of people. Because if you think about like over the last few decades, if you go to like the early 1900s, like when do most people get electricity? Because even into the 70s, not everybody in America has electricity. You know, it's like most people do, yeah, but like there are still people, not who are just like, you know, swamp people or whatever. They're living out in shacks or whatever, and that used to be way more of a common thing deeper into the past, where people could exist without money. But today, you know, you do have people downsizing tiny homes. But I think that's just one manifestation of it, and it definitely is a different culture. It definitely is something that's that I think is interesting and worth noting.
So I guess what ties most of this back to like the reason why I even wanted to talk about this topic is, you know, I think these days everybody talks about diversity. They want diversity here, they want diversity there, they want white, black, Mexican, any number of things. Yet when they come to their thoughts, they don't open diversity.
Right.
They're not open
the same
to
thing.
Yeah. If you don't think like I think, then you must be wrong. You know.
Right.
And although we know it's not true, like oftentimes we encounter that every day where it's like Sam's wrong. Mm-hmm. I just know he is because he's thinking differently than I do, and it's okay. It's human nature and whatnot. Yeah. But I think that the point I was trying to make with that is that like we need all of those different opinions. We need all of those different values. We need all of those different things for the ecosystem of humans to be successful.
Right.
And so oftentimes when we talk about the workplace culture and the different types of cultures that exist, it's really important. It really is, because we need those white collar people to be successful. We need the politicians to be successful as much as we don't want to.
I know. And there needs to be a balance of power between these different groups.
You know, we need to have the blue collar to be successful. You know, on the extreme end, you know, there's often a lot of talk about like migrant farm workers and stuff and how we shouldn't allow them here. And they're taking jobs and they're doing all this. But at the same time, it's a very integral part of how our society runs.
Yeah.
It's mandatory, you know.
Right.
So no matter who we look down upon, no matter who we look up to, no matter who's the same or different than us, it's all very necessary for this all to function the way it does. It's just one big ecosystem.
Yeah, it really is. There was something I wanted to say that I forgot. But yeah, it is one big ecosystem. Different parts are different parts have their own roles, but those different parts also they also advocate for themselves. And I think what we're seeing today, and this gets a little bit away from workplace culture, but I think what we're seeing today is large companies and industries, like I'm thinking of the pharmaceutical industry right now, they get to the point where they have so much power that they then are using that power and influence to influence policy to the point where they're creating a situation that is good for them and bad for other people. But yeah, that's a different topic. Entirely.
A whole different beast, yeah.
Yeah. So you want to talk about human nature versus culture, which is something I brought up in one of the first few episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Human nature versus culture and diversity of thought. You really did just bring that up.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what I wanted to say? I wanted to say that, like, you know, when I was in college, the people that the professors, people that are professors, they point to they're from a very specific class. They're richer than most Americans. They grew up more wealthy, and they have similar ideas based on being professors. They wouldn't be allowed to be professors if they weren't accepted into this like upper echelon. And you know, there's gatekeeping through the use of like tenure and PhD selection. There are a lot of individual people who are in this system who think a certain way, and if you don't reach their standards, they don't want you in there. And that's why I'm the illegitimate scholar rather than being a real scholar, is because I did not fit in academia, and I wouldn't fit in. And I love to think about things. I love to talk about things, and that's one way to do it. But that's not the only way to do it.
And you're just saying I don't need to be included to be successful in this.
Right.
You don't have to include me.
I don't have to do it in that way.
Yeah.
In that social construct. But one example I have of like, there's a lot of examples of the professors being like completely out of touch. And, you know, they have diversity in the sense that there are different people from different countries and different races. But like the thing I always come back to when I'm thinking about how out of touch professors are is the term Latinx. Have you ever heard the term Latinx?
No.
Really? You never have? Okay. So Latinx is a term that's meant to describe Hispanic Latino people.
Oh, okay.
And it's been thought up by universities in the last few years. And in universities, it's used exclusively to refer to Hispanic and Latino people. And it's like considered the correct term. But in a recent poll from either Gallup or Pew Research, which are two of the largest polling groups in the country, they found that less than 6% of Hispanic people chose that as their preferred term, and most people hadn't even heard of it. Most Hispanic people hadn't heard of it. But that's what they're using in college to refer to Hispanic people. And all the Hispanic professors, they use Latinx. And they would kind of encourage everyone else to use it. And if you don't use it, you're somehow outside of the norm. And you might be accused of racism or being insensitive, even though they're the ones using a term that the majority of the people they're describing with it don't like.
Yeah. Well, and why is it so hard for people to understand that if you give me a term, I'm going to reject it?
Yeah.
No matter like how great it is, no matter how accurate it is, if you give it to me and I don't have a say, I'm just not going to use it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just, fuck you, I'll do what I want.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
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 And why do we need more terms? Like why was Latinx a necessity? A necessity?
What often happens, in my opinion, is that these new terms get thought up by these pompous college professors because they're trying to create a name for themselves. They want to be the one who coined the new term that's accepted by everybody.
Yes. And like my kids right now in school
Yeah.
Are called scholars. If we say student, they don't like it. Not them, the kids, but the schools. You know, they say don't call them students, you call them scholars. And I'm like, well, I'm over 40 years old. I've been calling them students my entire life. Now you're telling me I have to call them a scholar. It doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, I have to do it.
It doesn't make any sense.
No. Why do
it
we
also
have,
there's not a functional difference between those two words.
Yeah. It's all just one big control issue as far as I see, where it's like I'm going to have to be smarter than you. I'm going to have to be more savvy than you. And I'm going to do so with funny words.
Yes.
When it's just not necessary.
I like funny words. Yeah.
It doesn't change the test scores. It doesn't make the kids smarter. It
Yeah.
just makes everything more confusing, especially for the parents, you know?
Yeah. But I mean, in a certain way, so that's another thing. It doesn't. So these words, these new words that are thought up, like Latinx or LGBTQIA+, these they come out of the most prestigious universities, where if you look at a college like Harvard, Yale, MIT, the students that go there, their median family income is around and over $200,000 a year. So the median student, their parents make $200,000 a year. And they do let in a few poor students, but median means middle. So the student at the middle whose parents make the average amount of money, not it's not a mean, so it's not a raw average. Yeah. It's a median in this, and I know you know this, but I'm explaining this so anybody. It's the middle person. So it's not skewed left or right. It can't be, because it's the median. So it's over $200,000 a year for all these colleges. And the median family income in the United States is like $57,000 a year. Like, the kids who are going to these schools are the rich, they're the upper class, mostly. And there are a disproportionately small amount of people from lower classes. And these terms, they come out of these universities. And it allows these new trendy terms that they use, it allows the upper class and the professor class to kind of, based on the way that people talk, it allows them to disclude poor people, really, is what it ends up doing. They can disclude people who aren't up and up on, and they can shame them when they're not using the correct and proper new terms that Yale has thought up.
I totally understand what you're saying, try to dictate the narrative.
Yeah.
This is how we want people to think, and these are the terms that are going to help us get there. But if you really think about buzzwords, how many have you heard that come out of Harvard, and how many have you heard that come out of TikTok? It's changing. It's not so much coming from the top anymore.
Well,
there's a lot of terms that have generated from social media, especially the TikToks, and they become.
I'm talking about academic language, not slang. Okay. I'm talking about different thing. But yeah, definitely that's also that's a different thing entirely. But people use it in the same way. The kids will talk in a certain way, and I come in there and I'm like, that's dope. They don't like. They're like, what the heck are you saying?
But given that it's a culture podcast, that I think we touched on something important there, which is like, what's like the single biggest thing that's changed our culture as a whole from top to bottom more than social media? There's nothing.
No. Oh yeah, I thought you were going to tell me something. I'm like, no, I'm
No,
sure it's social media.
Yeah. No, it's like maybe the TVs did that in the 50s.
Yeah,
right. And then the internet did that in the late 90s.
Yeah. Well, social media completely changed the way that people interact with each other and the way that information is shared. And unfortunately, where we're at in 2022 is that the social media companies have an insane amount of control over what is allowed to be said. Like for a long time, it was that the lab leak theory was considered misinformation. You could be banned off of social media for using it. And now it's the accepted term. Nobody apologized for it or anything. And stuff with the trans stuff. Like social media companies were, and I don't know, probably still are, banning people for saying something like a man is not a woman, which, it's not very nice in the context of denying somebody who is trans how they want to be called, but it's when the Taliban is allowed to be on Twitter, I don't know. I don't feel like we should be banning people for saying a man is not a woman. Yeah,
well, and it's such an interesting topic that you could do a whole different episode on in terms of censorship and whatnot. But one thing I really do appreciate about culture as it pertains to social media, though, is like we are very limited to what we get exposure to outside of our direct culture, whether it's in our home or in our school. But this allows us to get into the lives of virtually anybody we want to. We can see how this person acts in Connecticut. We can see how this person, who's a real estate agent, acts in Seattle.
Yeah. Well, you can see their curated version of themselves, really.
Totally like, buttoned up and made to look good. But you're seeing it. You get to see how this family acts. You get to see how this person who looks like this acts. And it just allows you to see like all the vast differences that are out there. And it makes it, see, for me, what happens is, especially what I see with my kids, it makes it more normal for them. Like they see these things and it's not a shock. They're not shocked by culture the way I was shocked by culture. Like I'll give a very specific example. Like back when I was in school, if somebody came out as being gay, it was a shock. And that would go through the entire school.
Yeah.
There would be repercussions. Some people would accept it, some people wouldn't. The majority wouldn't.
Right.
They'd be subject to ridicule and stuff like that. Whereas like nowadays, today, when it happens, it's still slightly an event, but it's not as big of a shock.
And it's a different
as
event.
it was then. Yeah,
they like it.
Totally.
It's promoted.
Exactly,
It's
and that's
like,
what I was talking about with social media.
Claps for being gay.
Right.
Kind of.
And that's kind of where I was talking about with social media being a driver in terms of changing cultures, because I see my kids seeing this on social media, and I think it's cool. Like it's cool that they can see different things and be able to accept it, and see these things happening more and more frequently, and not have it be such a shock. Because then at that point, I think what happens is when it's not a shock, you can take it for face value and make your own decision. Whereas, like, okay, for example, when I was in school, it was such a big shock. Well, why? Because that's so bad. So I'm thinking it must be bad because I'm being told it should be bad.
Right.
Like, oh, Sam is gay.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's the narrative. That's such a bad thing. Well, immediately, as part of that culture, this person being gay is bad.
Right.
Whereas today is different. It's totally different.
Especially, like when I was, you're about 15 years older than me, I think, maybe 12 or 13.
Maybe more.
It doesn't matter. But like, when I was going to school, it wasn't like, it was pretty accepted. Like gay marriage got legalized when I was in high school, but it was still like kind of an event. It was. But today, like it's funny because I was just talking to my sister earlier today, and we were watching an MTV reality show. So this is fresh in my mind, but we're watching an MTV reality show, and over 50% of the couples, literally over 50% of the couples, were on this show. It's a couple show, Love at First Lie, by the way. It's pretty good. If you're
not going to watch it.
If you care.
No.
Yeah. It's, I love watching reality shows. My sister is the only time I do it. Like more than half of the couples are either gay or the people are like non-binary and stuff, which is cool. Like I'm totally cool with that. But the only thing I was watching the show, and what I was thinking is like, wow, they're like, it's very overrepresented versus the regular population.
Right.
So it's like an exposure bias thing. And I looked it up, and these people on the show were, I think they were mostly millennials. There was probably some Gen Z on there, but they were mostly millennials. And I looked it up, and like 20% of Gen Z is LGBT. They identify as LGBT, 21%. And even then, it's only 1 in 5. In millennials, it's like 10, 12. But on the show, there's this exposure bias of this show is a popular show that has more than 50% of people being gay. And, people might see that and then think, well, that's representative of the regular population. Yeah. If it's consistent across other shows, which sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
You can definitely see that in commercials.
Yes.
It's crazy. Like,
it is crazy.
And that's totally fine. Yeah. I support that.
Yeah.
But it's funny how you can go from commercial to commercial, and you could spot I can almost see these executives sitting around the table thinking like, well, hey, where's our black guy today?
Right.
Well,
right.
Where's our gay person today? And that's totally cool because, I'd rather have it be overrepresented than underrepresented.
Yeah, me too.
It is what it is. But it's
better than playing
Spirit
the Queer, Like,
yeah. Oh my God, I haven't heard that in a while. Yeah.
I just remembered it thinking right now. I was like, wow, when we were in elementary school, middle school, like elementary school, we would play Spear the Queer.
Yeah.
We didn't know what queer meant, but we're like, well, you got the ball, everybody's going to run at you.
Mm-hmm.
And but we call it Spear the Queer. And that game comes from like, let's commit a hate crime. It's kind of like what it is. Even though, we weren't connecting it to being gay, but that's like where it came from.
But what are we talking about? Really, what we're talking about is an evolving culture. Here we are in 2022, and you're noticing the same things in Connecticut that I'm noticing in Seattle. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing is that, and I'm sure this is not exclusive to just America, but what we're seeing is a more open society, a more forgiving society. Now we have our extremes, of course, but it's vastly more open and forgiving today than it was 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And
I'll take that aspect of it, but there's other aspects of it that I think are related, which are kind of a problem.
True. Well, there's a great many things that make up a culture.
Mm-hmm.
But if, with this podcast being of culture, like what we are seeing is a vastly, like a really fast changing culture towards more and more acceptance. And rightly so. It's been a long time coming. I'm 43 years old now, and I've been seeing people fight for equality and justice my whole life. And for a good 30 years, there was no change. And now, like I was saying, with social media, with that platform, with the amount of people that people are seeing calling for change and whatnot, it's accelerated that so quickly to the point where it's so different today.
Yeah, at least here. It's like there's still not, like, LGBTQ rights are not really respected in the majority of the rest of the world.
Right, yes.
And here's the problem I think I might see, is that I think that Western society, it's possible that Western society is in decline. A lot of people will argue that. And really, I don't know. Because it's such a multi-factored thing that you can't really call it. But if Western society goes into decline, our ideas, including those ideas of tolerance, will also go into decline. And it's possible that we might be forced to, or essentially forced to through coercion, through like bad things happening to our country and our culture, to then adopt the culture of someone else in certain aspects.
See, I hear that all the time. And I can appreciate that. People say, oh, we're in decline. But if you look around at your neighbors, like even right now in a downturn, in a close to a recession, does it look like things are declining?
Yes.
Really?
Well, I mean, I live in like a nice middle class neighborhood. I'm very
totally
fortunate.
Yeah. Well, whether it's that or the difference, like there's not. I don't
compare right now to 2005. Socioeconomically, I think we're a lot worse off.
Yeah.
We were. Inequality is rising quite a bit.
Yeah, I guess I just don't. I see people traveling more than ever. I see people buying more and more cars than needed. I see more and more people eating out more. I don't see as many people doing things at home to save money. I do see a lifestyle, and maybe this is just a Seattle thing because we are, quite blessed around here recently. Maybe it's just around here, but it doesn't seem in society like people are like you might feel people tightening their belts because things are slowed down a little bit right now.
Yeah.
But as a whole, all I see is advance spending, excess, things like that, and that's fine.
Well,
like, who's to say that they shouldn't have that?
The
if
thing
they work
is
hard to get
that
it?
you might be seeing those things, and those might be represented in the data as a whole of what people are buying. And yes, Seattle is a more affluent area.
Mm-hmm.
It is. There's lots of parts of the country. I travel all around the country, and I do volunteer work in like places that need disaster response. So I've been to some extremely poor situations, like rural white people, city black people, all and everything in between, of like very, very poor people. But that spending that you're seeing, by the way, a lot of that is funded by debt, unfortunately.
Oh, true.
So the amount of credit that we're using as Americans has gone up and up and up. And it is, we were talking about social media. A lot of that is fueled by this need to consume.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess for me, though, what I mean by like when I'll admit the society is declining is when you have like a 2-parent household and they have only one vehicle because they can't afford two. Or you see an entire family only taking the bus because they can't even afford one.
I think
and we might see
there.
a few people there. We might be getting there, but what I'm saying is we're not quite there yet.
So I guess when I say in decline, I'm not like the fallout from what's happening right now is going to be seen for the next few decades, I think.
What's happening right now?
So what's happening right now is it's not really being talked about a lot, but a lot of the American, gosh, this is a huge economic conversation, but a short version is that the petrodollar holds up the American economy. And the petrodollar is that Saudi Arabia, and by extension, whatever it is, the OPEC, they take money for oil in U.S. dollars. But there have been a few countries recently who are using the yuan, the renminbi, the Chinese currency. I think some have even used the Russian currency, the ruble, and as well as just gold to pay for their petroleum, their oil, and as well as the. Do you know what a price to earnings? You know what a price to earnings ratio is,
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
right? So a price to earnings ratio for our listeners, all 6 of them, is
7.
7. Yeah, all 7 of them. So the price to earnings ratio is the price of a stock versus the earnings of that stock. So the earnings of the company. So the price of a share of stock, for the price of a market cap of the stock, which is all the shares times the amount of shares that there are, so the total value of the company divided by the amount of money that they make. So that's the price divided by the earnings, P&E. That's what it is. And we are right now seeing the highest P&E ratios that we've ever seen. And that's because all of it is funded by overprinting of money, and all of this increase in stock market value is not fueled by actual increase in production, but it's fueled by overprinting of money, cheap debt, and people like the Fed just printing out so much money that people are then putting that money into investments. Some of it's being spent, it's
Well, and what we're seeing too is like you can print as much money as you want, but then it's flowing outside of the country. Going to foreign corporations, going to foreign labor, especially going to foreign
more
goods. And it's like you can print all the money you want and water down the dollar, but then as soon as you're shipping it out of the country, then it just compounds the problem. And then what happens is now we need more money to replace it.
And especially what I think is going to be a major problem is that the richest people in the world are increasingly becoming like stateless. Not stateless in the sense of like a refugee is stateless, but stateless in the sense that they are like they can move between countries and they can move their money between countries. And I think that a lot of these people are going to jump ship when America starts going down, and there will be a feedback loop. And I think it's possible that there's like a collapse of America. I don't know if it's the most likely scenario, but like, countries rise and fall. And we have been the world's reserve currency for about 100 years, almost, about 80. But like that situation props up the American economy because there's money inflows from other countries. And what we're seeing now is it's possible that those inflows in money into the U.S. are going to be replaced with outflows of money from the U.S. And our economy will not be propped up on those things anymore, which requires a major reckoning because we as a culture have this culture of consumption, and you can't just switch that off in a day. That's how people think.
It takes decades. It's like driving on ice.
Right. So it's the fallout of this could be very extreme, and you know, something could happen where it's just wrecked. Like the economy is just wrecked. Like,
well, consequently, on the flip side, you had, we weren't that vastly different in, say, 1990, and then what we saw, we saw things going to foreign countries more and more and more, and then technology came around. Your Microsoft and your companies like that, and then we were propped up by that for the next 30 years, and now that's starting to cycle out because these technologies are now being outsourced. So something that was exclusive to America wasn't I'm not going to say an American invention, but something that became our calling card is slowly going outside the country as well. So what propped us up for the last 30 years is now sliding outside. So the question then becomes, like, what's going to replace that?
I don't know if anything is going to replace the tech industry. The tech industry, I think. I mean, tech is still in America right now in a lot of ways, but I think that those companies could very easily move to another country if they wanted to. And it's easier now. It's more easy now than ever. I don't know. I think we're in trouble. We'll see.
Yes, I hear you. But, people have always been saying, oh, we're in trouble. And I gave away my age on accident earlier. I'm 43. And, people have been saying America's been in trouble since I was a child,
Yeah.
And the funny thing is it just doesn't happen. Yeah. I mean, we're still here and we're still plugging right along. And, I'm happy. I'm joyous. I'm free. I love it. And, that's kind of to tie a lot of things back to, like, what we came on here to talk about tonight was, there is such a big mix of people in this country that come from all these different professions that contribute to all of this stuff, and it's all necessary. Like we said, it's all one big ecosystem, and we have to have people who are optimistic. We have to have people that are pessimistic.
Yeah,
we have to have people that accept everything blindly, and we have to have people that think every single thing is a conspiracy. Like, it's all just necessary, and at the same time, like, we need these different subcultures, if you will, that come around all these different professions.
Yeah.
So I guess when you think about professional cultures, you talked about the Marines, I talked about state government, real estate. Like, what are some other ones that stick out to you as, like, weird or elegant, if you will? Like, I don't know. What are some things that come to mind as it pertains to a work environment that really stands out in that respect?
So this is a little bit different because it's not in America, but this was either Korean or Japanese airline pilots. Have you ever heard about this?
Well, you haven't told me what it is.
Right. But have you heard? This is probably the only thing you would have ever heard about Korean or Japanese airline pilots.
You'd be surprised.
Okay. So there is, the culture in Korea, Japan, China. These are Confucian cultures. They're based in Confucianism, largely. Like, Confucianism is a large influence on those, and they're very, like, it's actually, it's kind of almost similar to how the Marine Corps is, because, like, they're very regimented and based on hierarchies, and the relationships between a boss and a subordinate are very important, and they're very outlined. So, there was this situation where these airlines in either Korea or Japan, people are gonna, if anyone was listening, they would hate me for just
listener number 3.
They're the same
Please
thing.
Look it up and post in the comments.
Obviously, I don't know the difference, but they were having more crashes than other airlines, and what they eventually found out is that, like, the co-pilot would tell the main pilot that there was an issue, but they would be so soft about it that the main pilot didn't listen. And so you'd have jetliners flying into a mountain. Like, literally that happened one of the times.
So I told you would be surprised. I know in Japan with bullet trains, they had an excessive amount of people that were going too fast around corners, derailing, stuff like that. And so they had to create their own system of calling out certain things. And so now it's basically mandatory for conductor to state what they're thinking out loud a number of times.
Oh, okay.
So, like for example, if they're going 300 miles an hour and they're coming up on a corner that's 250, they have to call out 1 or 2, 3 different times, corner ahead, 250 miles an hour, because when you speak it, it becomes more relevant in your mind.
Yeah, and that's smart, and that's a cultural shift that they did in order to deal with that problem. Like, and I don't know if these dudes going like way too fast around corners is like based on their culture.
Got you.
I mean, I guess it is. It is in a certain way.
Yeah, I guess it's not totally relevant, but so
No,
you were
is,
saying though that the cultural piece of that then was that the pilot doesn't listen to the co-pilot.
Right. There, because he's a subordinate. He or she, probably he.
Yeah, understood. Less than me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
and where do they get that?
They get that from, like, that is how the society is. It functions in a lot of ways. Like, this is like from kids.
Yeah, totally.
You know, the first Confucian relationship is between, like, and I think is between like a child and their parent, and then it's a school teacher to kid. You know, it's like all these different things, and they go both ways. But there's an expectation on both the leader and the subordinate.
But what's fascinating about that though is what you're saying is they don't not listen because they're a pilot. They don't listen because of who they were coming to be a pilot. So that's the question for me then becomes, why does that profession draw that personality type?
Well, it's based on their position in the company. So, like, because they're the main pilot, they're in charge.
Understood.
Yeah.
But I would say the vast majority of people who get there have that mentality.
I mean, I think that mentality is pervasive in that culture. So, like, I don't want to speak out of turn, but that's, there's a lot of things in Eastern Asian cultures that are based in Confucianism that have characteristics like this.
But you see where I'm going with that. Like when we bring it back to white collar, blue collar, I would say that 80% of the people who enter a blue collar job have that mentality going into it.
Right. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And so it's funny because we talk about workplace cultures, but oftentimes it's the culture as a whole that's going to dictate what those look like. I know for me personally, I had decided that was a topic I wanted to contribute on, only because, like, I was a part of state government for 15 years, and it's very different. It's 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. You accrue vacation, you accrue sick time, you take time off when you want, when you can. You earn a decent salary. You're not going to get rich off it, but you live off a hierarchy.
Right.
You have a boss who has a boss. Well, and because we're in Washington State, you have 6 to 8 more bosses above that, because we're very, very government heavy.
A lot
here.
of job stability.
Very government heavy here, which is fine.
It's not that fine.
But
sounds pretty shitty to me.
Right, but you get what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
It's like it's a very so along with that comes unions. And so I used to always like to say that, like, I'm never gonna like get too much praise at my job for doing the most amazing job possible, because it's so watered down. It's not individual at all. It's very much team oriented. But at the same time, like, I can do nothing for an entire week, and not many people are gonna notice.
Yes,
there might be a few around me that do. But so then, when that type of work environment wears on me, and I decide to make a change to come do real estate, which is essentially sales or whatever. But yeah, so it's totally different when I come to do real estate. It's completely different, where it's not at all a team environment. It can develop into that, of course, but when I come here, I basically have a few people that show me how to get started, what it is I'm trying to do and whatnot, and now I have to go out and find it. I have to go out and find the knowledge of how to get this done, that done, whatnot. I have to go find my own business. I have to go find my own clients. Right. I have to troubleshoot all my own problems. Like, there's a ton of resources, yes, but the difference being it's no longer 9 to 5. I'm now basically 24 hours a day on call, if you will.
Yeah.
If I have 2, 3, 4 active clients, I can work 20 hours a day, and it doesn't even feel like I'm working. It's amazing.
Yeah. I know how you feel.
And then, there's times where I don't have any clients, and it feels like I'm not doing anything ever. And so, but see, I appreciate that piece of it, because it's so vastly different from where I was. But the reason that it stuck out to me as a topic along the lines of culture that was worth discussing was because the type of people I worked with at the state and the type of people that I work with now are completely different.
Yeah.
It could not be further.
Right.
Like at the state, it was one big happy family. But of course, in any happy family comes a ton of dysfunction. Uncles that hate each other, aunts that hate each other, all that good stuff that comes with it. But now I come over here and it's very much individuals only. And so then what develops from that is quite fascinating. You don't have a community of support. Well, you do. Like, there is support and you can seek it out. But if you go ask 10 peers for help, inside the company is different. So if I go ask 10 peers outside of the company for help, maybe 2 will help me. It's very individual, and people see it as you're threatening my business, whatever. So it becomes very cutthroat in that. It becomes very individual only, but with that comes a lot of egoism. And that's like one of the biggest things that I struggle with in this job is that, it's like egos run rampant and it's hard to deal with.
Yeah.
It's hard to deal with that on a day in and day out basis. It's just so different, And so I think about all the different types of professions that have such vast differences. And like one of the ones we had talked about was like, say, professional sports players. It's very easy to look, like when I say that, it's very easy to picture their lifestyle. Who are they? What do they do? Who do they hang out? What's important to them? What defines success? What doesn't?
Yeah.
It's a very public profession that's very distinct. And so we can think about that. We talked about teachers. We talked about state workers.
Yeah.
Real estate, but there's
Military,
so many
pilots,
of them out there.
yeah,
So many
pilots
different
in
subsets of
Right.
pilots, Japanese pilots.
Yeah. Japanese or Korean, not sure, don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's just so many of them, and it really does take all of these to be a successful society.
And they all have different traits that would work. Like at your state job, there isn't really an incentive to perform.
No.
And that comes along with it, like it attracts a certain type of person. Okay. I'm surprised that you were there for so long, frankly.
Okay. There is an incentive, but it's internal. It comes down to your own pride and your own.
Right. There's no incentive given by the job to perform. Correct. Real estate, there's entirely an incentive to perform because you putting in more hours, you can make more money.
Yes.
Essentially, the amount of money that you can make is unlimited. Not in practicality, but in theory.
Yes, I see what you're saying, but yeah, it takes a certain type of person to go be a public servant where darn well, A, I'm not going to get rich doing this, and B, I'm not going to get any trophies or anything.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a lot of security in that.
Mm-hmm.
You have your very set salary that's not based off commissions. You have your health benefits. You have your retirement, your time off, all of that stuff. And that stuff does not change.
Right.
So there is something to be said for security.
Absolutely there is. And I think there's a lot of positives of it. And obviously I'm an entrepreneur, so I don't have that, and I kind of wish I had that. But, there's pros and cons to every job. The pro of that, like having that security, on the other hand, it's kind of golden handcuffs. Like you have security, and the security is that you're trapped, because if you make your money from something like that, then you're stuck there, and you're stuck with potentially a bad boss. You have a boss that you love for 10 years. You're working there. You don't control who your manager is. You're having a great time. Somebody comes in, they're a real asshole, and it could change your entire situation.
Well, in that amount of time in state government, we saw that quite a bit.
I'm sure you did. Yeah. I'm sure you saw it a bunch. And it it can completely change it. Whereas for me, I'm still subject to outside influences. I'm still subject to obviously, I'm an investor, so I'm still subject to the markets. Mm-hmm. I'm subject to the housing market for my real estate stuff. I'm subject to all these different things, but they're and those are external factors, but there's so much more that's in my control, and the flip side, there's so much more that I'm responsible for. And I think all these different jobs will attract a certain type of person, and also people have to adapt possibly to fit the role that they're in.
But see, as an individual, you're driven by your vision. Whereas when you work for somebody else, especially with that many tiers above you, with such turnover at the top, everybody who comes in has a different vision of what success looks like and how to get there. And so what happens is that vision trickles down, and it's always changing above you.
Yeah.
And so then at that point, you become an adapter, not really an innovator,
Right.
if you will. But when you're an individual, you do it for yourself,
Yeah. Yeah.
which contributes to that culture of your workplace or any workplace.
It does. Right. Yeah. And then eventually, if you're an entrepreneur and if you're a particular type of entrepreneur, you eventually will, most entrepreneurs, if successful enough, will eventually, they'll have some sort of staff, whether that be like full-time staff or whether it be like, contractors. You can get like freelance stuff because, I mean, I hire freelancers for certain things sometimes. And
Like what?
like,
Cut your grass?
no, for I'm remodeling my bathroom and I just had a guy come do the floor. So he did the floor. I'm going to do the rest of the bathroom.
There you go.
But I had him do the floor. I contracted out the.
You just made it sound really fancy.
No, it's not. It's not fancy at all. That's not what I do. But I got my podcast symbol, my podcast art from a guy from it's either Bangladesh or Pakistan, and I should know because those two countries don't really like each other. But it was one of those two. They used to be the same country, in my defense.
Okay.
It was a long time before I was born, but they used to be the same country. And then when you create that, you're then setting the culture of the company. Mm-hmm. Like right now, Elon Musk bought Twitter. He's changing the culture of that place a lot.
Yeah.
Good or bad, depending on how you feel. I think it's neutral. I just think it's hilarious. Like, I don't really care how he changes
Like I
it.
just said, though, right? Changing visions.
Right.
Drastic, totally
Right.
different.
Yeah.
And along with vision comes ego. And
Yeah.
control.
Oh,
That's where he comes in. And, I just said this on a small scale at like my professional level, but you can see it plain as day right there. Like, I know the best way to do these things.
Mm-hmm.
Or I know what's best for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
number one. Not me.
No,
Others,
Elon
right?
Musk or just
And number
CEOs
two,
in general.
I know the best way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they start rolling out all these changes, and it remains to be seen what's going to happen with that. But that's going on all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so that is all for today for us talking about
What episode?
workplace culture. Episode 13
There you
is
go.
what it is. Next one's going to be 14. We're actually going to do the next one right now, but that's all for today. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts, you want to yell at me, email me at illegitimatescholar@gmail.com. Links are in the podcast thingy. So
But
where it is.
also, after they finish listening, what should they do?
What should they do?
Forward to a friend.
Yeah, you should do that. I should probably be telling people to do that. No one's going to listen to me. No one even made it this far.
Yeah, if you're listening to this, guys, do me a favor. Post Sam's podcast out to your Facebook page or your friends. He's trying to gain support.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right.
Okay, thanks.